Alright. So this morning we're going to focus on one of our applications that we call SimVista. This is our database creation tool that we have. It involves the assets that we provide as well as using Internet Scene Assembler to create a database. So we will go through the process of creating our own custom database and then being able to drive that database and use it in our simulation. So that's the premise of the training this morning. And then this afternoon we will work on SimCreator DX, which is our scenario development tool. So initially SimVista was what we used for both the database creation and scenario development. However, now we use SimVista just for database creation, and we use SimCreator DX for our scenario development. So today's focus is we're going to be able to create some scenes and some tiles and develop a world. We're going to talk about what building a world is and how to do it, and then also we're going to focus on being able to publish your world, run it in your simulation, and then also convert it so that you can use it in Fusion. So we're going to talk about kind of all those different processes and basically the database creation pipeline for your study. So ISA is something that we use for our database development. It allows us to use tile-based scene authoring. So we provide what we call tiles, which are 200 by 200 meter squares. They're provided for you in different categories, different object categories, and you're allowed to pick those objects, change the different textures, change additional assets on top of those textures to kind of build a world that you want to use for your study. So we'll talk about how to change a texture. We'll also talk about how to add foliage and stuff like that as well. So you can develop your environment that you would like to run your study in. So the scenario development process is no longer, like I said, is no longer something that we do in SimVista. It's something that we actually pulled away and are doing it in SimCreator DX. However, the database creation that we use works seamless with SimCreator. So we use something that I mentioned earlier, in files that you can load static values into on Tuesday, and those in files actually you can add in a specific vermal file to load in a new database. So I'm not as familiar with this, but the way that you can do it is you can change the static values to load up a new scenario or a new world that you'd like to test in. So most of the SmackSim Civilian and most of the tools that we provide are mostly for testing. Once you publish it and put it into Fusion, that's when you can start doing your development in SimCreator DX. So we do have some example scenarios that you can actually take a look at. Some of these are located in system test scenarios, so you can go into on your computers if you like here, or on the simulator yourself. You can look at the system test scenarios, and there are JavaScripts connected to each one of the scenarios that have different worked examples. So if you're looking for something, you can use that as kind of a good starting point. And the best way to do it is you open up the worked example, and then you publish that as Tile World, and then you would run it through SmackSim Civilian. The reason why we ask you to, or we tell you to publish this Tile World, so that you don't have to create a custom in file to run that specific vermal file. So I'm going to say vermal files a lot. w.wrl is a vermal extension, so that is the file format of our database creation. So this is the layout of ISA, Internet Scene Assembler. We'll talk about each one of the different views. So there is a plan view, a main view, a properties window, a scene tree, and an object gallery. Your main window gives you a 3D visualization of the world that you're developing. Your plan view is more of a top-down, higher-level view of the world and in grid format, so it allows you to easily position and snap tiles together. This also allows you to make sure that the world you're generating might be is the appropriate size and isn't too big. We'll talk about if you do want to make a big world, how we can go through that as well. In addition to those two windows, you have the properties window, and the properties window is very important because it allows you to look at specific information on that object. So a tile or an object is something that you can place into the plan window, and you can go into that object in the properties, change its position, its placement, as well as its orientation, and you can also go in and change specific textures. So if you want the grass to be snow, or if you want the sidewalks to be a little darker color or lighter color, you can go in and change those textures to add more customization to that tile. In addition to that, we have a scene tree. The scene tree is a hierarchical view similar to something you would see in Photoshop, where it would have this specific object, and if you add an asset on top of that object, like a tree, it would add that object and embed it into that environment. So it allows you to kind of create a scene or a group of objects together, and then you can actually publish that as another object, and we'll talk about that as well. So, palette controls. So in your object gallery, you have options to select different tiles. These different palettes are the tiles that we provided for you. So there is a way for you to go through in different tabs, and we have them separated in categories. And you can add your own category as well, and we'll talk about where these are being pointed. But if you were to make a custom folder like U of M or something like that, you can save your custom objects into that, and we save them in the released objects folder under the program files ISA location, which we'll talk about in just a second. So adding and moving tiles, you can drag the tile from the palette or the object gallery window to the plan view, and then it will snap to the grid. Then you can rotate and change it either using your mouse or putting in finite placement values. So we will show this as an example and kind of go back and forth between the slides and the actual software itself. But I'm just going to kind of go through this first, and then we'll go and actually try to create an example. So you can adjust the tile placement in two places. You can adjust it using the plan view with a mouse, or you can also adjust it in the main window as well. But I highly recommend, if you're trying to be accurate, to use the properties window. This allows you to get the exact XY position as well as the rotation that you'd like. So it's useful to use the plan view or the 2D view kind of as the starting position to get everything kind of more of a coarse positioning of where you want things, and then you to find or to make it a little bit more accurate, you'd use the properties to get those values correct. Any questions on this so far? I know this is kind of, you guys are going to want to be able to mess around with it first before you can get comfortable with it. I understand that. So we'll go through this really quick, and then we'll actually start using the software. So navigation through within ISA. So this allows you to navigate when you're in your 3D view. There's a few different ways. You can either fly or pan to move the camera, or up and down, or left and right. And then you can also use the move camera position to walk or plan. So we'll talk about all those different ones, and you can use arrow keys to move around in the main window, and then also you can use the mouse to rotate yourself as well. So there's also some pretty nice return to home navigation tools. So if you ever get flipped upside down or something like that while you're trying to navigate through your world, there are a few navigation tools here. So you look for the target icon and you would hold left click on that and it'll open up a drop down, and then you can move your mouse onto one of the selected one of the drop down positions, and it will be a different orientation around a cube, basically of isometric views of your world. In addition to that, using the collider is actually very useful. So this icon here, this allows you to collide with objects. So if you want to if you want to hit the ground on your world and then be able to tilt up so that you can move around in it, using that use collider can be very beneficial for you. Changing the appearance of tiles and objects. So we have some available textures that you can use. You can go and look into the texture gallery, or you can add your own textures as well. These are .pngs that we provide that can be adjusted for specific attributes to the tiles. So like I was mentioning before, if you don't want to use grass and you might want to use snow, or if you want to use a different style or grain of grass, we have some different options for you in your texture gallery. So on each tile, when you go into the properties, you'll see that the roads or the foliage or something like that has a specific texture, and you can go into that and actually change that texture in the properties. So we'll show that as an example as well. In addition to that, after you've developed your tiles, you can start adding some static objects. There are static object palettes for civilian vehicles, military vehicles, roadside objects, signs, structures, terrain features, and vegetation. So you can go and look through those and add additional 3D objects to your environment. Keep in mind that there are additional assets that you can use in Fusion and SimCreator DX. However, for now, or at least in this case, we recommend that you put the majority of your static objects in ISA before you publish your database and use it in Fusion. So we'll talk about that as well, things that you can add in addition to the current assets that you have in ISA. So building a custom tile, you can build a custom tile and it can be very useful for you to do this. Let's say you want to create a very large database, but maybe you want to use the same trees throughout, or the same road structure throughout the whole database. If you're creating a very long road, what you can do is you can build a custom tile by first just adding a object like a 200 meter low speed 2-lane road, and then you add whatever foliage you want onto it. You can save that object as a new object, and then now you can start using that over and over again instead of having to add those trees or build the scene over and over and over again as well. So it can be very useful for you to kind of save miniature versions of maybe like one world that you've created, and then connect that with a different world, so that you can have a bigger world instead of having to do it all at once. You might have one specific scene that you'd like for one study, but then your next study that you do, you might want to be able to add to it. So this can be very useful if you're trying to make custom tiles and save them for a different study or to add on in the future. So save as object and release as objects. Save as objects is where we would put our saved custom tiles. So once you create something custom, As you can see in this location right here, C, program files, parallel graphics, ISA, save as object. We typically tell you to create your own custom folder within that location, and then once you have created a custom folder, then you can save your custom tiles in there. And once you have finished working on that specific tile, you want to publish that tile and save that into the releases object. So release objects folder is in the same location as the save as objects folder, and then you would also want to create another folder inside of that. And like I was saying before, if you create a custom folder there, that's where the object gallery is going to take in as a new tab. So if you put U of M, or if you put your name or something like that, then it will save that under that releases objects location. Any questions on this so far? And we'll go through examples of this as well, so don't worry. All right. We'll skip this for now. Version numbers. So when creating your own objects, it's important to increment the version number. So it's, could be nice if, so that you don't duplicate or update an object or what has changed. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good idea to generate a new version number every single time you save a new object or you release a new object, just to make sure that you don't lose a version that you might have needed in the future, or in the past. Inline files. So if your database gets too large, we use inline files to kind of group those together. So an inline file is a vermal file that can basically stitch other vermal files together. So you can have a first file and a second file, and what an inline file will do is it'll position the first file and second file wherever you want to place it. So this is an example of what a vermal file, of an inline file will look like. It's translating the first tile at 0, 0, 0, and then the second one would be at 0, 0, negative 800. As you can see in this picture here, that's what we're trying to do in that inline file. So if you ever get a database that might be too big or starting to slow down in ISA or something like that, you can always look into using an inline file instead if you're creating a really big world that has a ton of assets. This will help alleviate some of the computing restrictions in Vermal. All right, so now we're to the example part. We're going to build a world. So what we're going to do is we're going to open Internet Scene Assembler on all of your desktops. You'll see it's located on the right side, and we're going to build the example world that you can see on the screen right now. So we're using Internet Scene Assembler to build a world. We're following the example to the left, and then we'll briefly go through any of the additional training as well. So is it okay if I take over back on this so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing? All right. Okay, so far I've only added 2 tiles, and you can see that they're not currently aligned yet, so I'm gonna have to do some work on that, but just, for now this is okay. I'm gonna keep adding the tiles that I think I want, so I'm gonna drag over another one of those, another one of those, one of those. And I'm just going to keep using the fit to scene and position them where I'd like to put them. Then I'm going to drag the flat turns and add those in as well. Hit fit to scene. And just keep doing kind of the regular positioning of everything. Now, once I have kind of a rough estimation of, okay, this is kind of where I want my tiles to be, then I can go in and I can start adjusting the orientation and placement of each one. So I'm going to select the first middle tile here and go to the Properties tab and select Placement. There I can see the X, Y, and Z value, so I'm going to change all those to 0. And that's going to place my tile directly on the center without any height. Now I'm going to move to the one to the right. Noticed, okay, this is close to 200, and I know that this tile is a 200 by 200, so I'm going to adjust that to 200 and adjust my Z value to 0 and my Y value to 0. Next thing I'm going to do is I need to rotate this by 90 degrees. So I'm going to change the Y position to 90 for the rotation. Sorry, negative 90 for the rotation. And then I'm just going to kind of move clockwise and go all the way through each one of the tiles. So I'm going to go in here, change the translation and the rotation. Any questions? So once I've aligned everything in ISA to what I want, then what I will do is I will check my 3D view and make sure that everything looks good. So I'm going to go to my target and change my position so that I can look at it from the top down, similar to what I can see here. So to me, everything looks like it's all connected, so I'm happy with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, save this world. So I'm going to click Save As and go to my Save As Objects. Then I'm going to create a new folder, title that U of M. I go into that folder and I'm going to save this as my test file. So now I have my test vermal file saved in my U of M directory. So I clicked Save As, and I wanted to navigate to that C, Program Files, Parallel Graphics, ISA, Save As Objects. I created a U of M folder, and I saved my test.thermal in that location. So what I was saying about the different navigation tools that you have, if you can look to the left, we have a toolbar that allows you to look onto different navigations. You can also adjust the speed of your navigation as well. If you right click onto the main view and look at speed, this allows you to move faster or slower if you'd like. There's also the option to switch between the different navigation tools here. However, you can also switch to them using this toolbar. So it's a very useful tool if you want to kind of set yourself up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my collider is on. I'm going to go to fly and keep plan on, and I'm just going to go directly, walk. I'm going to go directly into the ground, and then I'm going to switch to my turn and put myself forwards, and then back to this, and I can move myself around and use the arrow keys if you'd like, and you can kind of walk around in your world. So another thing we can do is if we want to drive in this world, we can use what we call a start point, and we can add a start point onto the ground so that we can actually drive in this database. So if we go to the scenario control tab, you will see that there are some scenario controls that we provided. This is what we used to use in SGL, but for testing purposes we want to make sure that we can add a start point. So I'm going to drag my start point onto my main view, and then I can adjust the position of this as well so that it is level with the ground. So to get the top-down view is you want to select the target, and then you want to select the first one. So if you can look on this, there's like a little highlighted yellow side on each one of these boxes, and that's going to give you a different viewpoint of that specific thing. So if I deselect anything on here, then it's going to use the main world. But if I select an object, for instance, then I can zoom in to that specific object as well. So you can do it on both the objects, or like a specific, if you want to do it on like a specific tile, you can do that as well. This allows you to, like, zoom in on one specific area that you'd like to work in. Or if you want to do it on the whole world, you just deselect away from it and you can do the whole world. So what I did here is I just added a start point, and then you can position it wherever you'd like. I'm just going to position it here so that I can see. I'm going to change my Y value, which is a height value, to 0, because I don't want it to clip or fall from the sky or anything like that. So this is the starting position that SimCreator is going to read to place the vehicle that you're driving in SimCreator. So it's definitely important to make sure that the height is correct. And then in addition to that, I'm going to add some foliage. So I'm going to go over to this intersection here in the middle. I'm going to add a few trees and maybe a building or something like that, just so that I can get used to it all. So if I go over to vegetation, I'll see all the different trees that we have in ISA, and I'm going to add a few trees around the area. And then as you can see in my scene, I've been adding everything onto the main intersection four-way, and they've been adding all the different attributes to that, all the different objects to that tile. So if I were, I could wrap this into a group and group certain tiles together. We can also do that. So if you wanted to group like kind of all of these, you can wrap them and group them together and add them into that group. This also allows you to change groups or duplicate groups and stuff like that too, so it can be very useful. Sorry. I keep losing it. So after I have added the trees, I'm going to go over to some structures and add a few structures as well. All right. So, I added a few trees, farmhouse, and a start point, and a little barn on the end as well. So, now that I'm done kind of messing around with my database, I'm going to save it again. And this time, I'm going to publish this database so that I can run it in SimCreator Civilian. So, what I'm going to do first, I'm going to select File, I'm going to click Publish, and currently it's publishing it in the Tile World directory. So this is where I'm going to publish my tile, and I'm going to change the name to Tile World. However, when you are saving an object, or if you are creating a released object, it will take whatever assets and textures that you're using and put them in a resources folder. So if you have anything custom, you need to make sure that the vermal file that you're publishing to will also carry over the resources for those textures. So in this case, Tile World and Tile World Res, which is where the resources will be, is a fine location. Keep in mind that if you are going to be saving it in Tile World and you are going to be saving it as Tile World, it will override whatever previous thing was there each time you do that. So you can save it as a custom vermal file, but in this case we're just going to be saving it as Tile World so that we can run it in SimCreator Civilian without having to create an in file. You don't need to do it this way. You can use a custom vermal name, whatever you'd like to say. You can have it as your saved as objects and then say published or something like that. We have a lot of people who do that as well, just so that you can differentiate between a saved and a published vermal file. In this case, we're just going to change it to Tile World for now, and then I'm going to click OK.
Where do I save it as?
So if you go to C Databases Tile World.
Oh no, not published, save as.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh. So in the Save As location, you go to C Program Files, Parallel Graphics, ISA, Save As Objects, and then I created a custom folder in there, and I named it U of M.
I don't think there is a save as objects folder in the CSA.
So you're in the Program Files x86. So you want to go to C,
Huh?
Program Files.
Okay.
Parallel graphics. And then you can you can say like create a new folder. You can type that new folder in whatever you'd like. And go into here and you can save that verbal file in there. Anyone have any questions on that? Need any help with that?
So we save in the database or in the ISA folder?
If you're saving your database, yeah. So the program files location isn't the location for the actual software. That's our location that we use for all of our assets. So yeah, that's where you want to save like any of your custom databases and stuff in there, so that all the textures and everything is going to be recognized in there. Every single tile that you're using has a specific path for that texture that it's looking for. So you want to make sure that you're not losing any of that.
I'm unable to save it. So it's like you don't have permission.
So if this isn't running as administrator, you might have that issue. So typically what I do is we have ISA set to open as administrator in here. So if that's not set for you, then it's not going to let you save it there because it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But You can save it like on your desktop for now,
Mhm.
and then publish it there as well. So after I've published my Vermo file, I can actually open that back up in ISA. However, I won't be able to make any of the changes that I made in here as a save as file. So if I were to go and go and locate that published file that I just did, so if I go to C, Databases, Tile World, and I go to my Tile World file that I just published, is not the world. Okay. C, Databases, Tile World, and I can open somehow saved it in the wrong location. Let me go back to this one. Okay. Now, if I go and open in C, Databases, Tile World, I'll have my Vermo file that I just made. For some reason it saved it in here again. Anyways, whatever. And I won't see anything in my properties or in my scene tree. I will only see the world itself. So I can still move around in the world, but I won't be able to change any of its attributes. So it can still be useful if you're like, oh, what was this published world that I created? You can still open it in ISA to make sure that everything is looking okay. So after I've done publishing it as Tile World, I can open SmackSim Civilian. So we can do that. So I'm going to open SimCreator and then select File, Open, and open that SmackSim Civilian model that we opened yesterday. So after we have made our changes to tile world, we can actually go and look into init terrain, for instance, and we'll see that there is a path here for a specific model as well as the resources. So we can look at the model name and we notice that already it's looking for tile world. That's the reason why we saved that vermal file as tile world, so that we don't have to change Maxim Civilian to do so. Like I was saying before, you can use an in file to change these static values in here so that you can adjust the path as well as the model name instead of having to use tile world as the name of the vermal file. But in our test right now, I'm doing that just for simplicity. Okay, so when we run Maxim Civilian, it will load the custom database that we made. We'll be able to drive in it just like we did previously. Traffic is automatic in SGL. Yeah, you have to change the density in order to get less traffic.
You open those maxims in
So this is just an easy way for us to be able to test the database and make sure that everything that we've changed is working correctly. This isn't what you'll be using when you're creating your scenarios. This is just a way for us to know and make sure that the database that we created is working correctly. So now that I've checked and made sure everything was working fine, I'm going to hit escape and close Maxim Civilian. So I'm happy with my database. I know everything's working fine. My next step is I'm going to have to convert this database. So if you have a full sim that might have multiple channels, you use something called copy tileworld.bat, and that will copy it from the center channel to all the different channels. But since you only have an RDS 100 and it's a desktop channel, you won't have to deal with any of this. So you will see two batch scripts on your computer, on the desktop of your computer, but those you can ignore for now. So you will see on your desktop a tool called Database Convert. This is an important tool for you to convert your database from SGL to Fusion. So this is something that we're going to use, and I'm going to make sure that I'm capturing this as well. So give me 1 second. So I'm going to open Database Convert. Okay. Oh. And so I'm going to open Database Convert, and on here it's going to prompt me with the option to switch between Vermal to IVE, Vermal to Flight, or Flight to IVE. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select Vermal to IVE. I'm also going to select Generate Open Drive and Generate Experiment. And in my inputs here, I'm going to select the Vermal file that I just created. So I'm going to browse and go to Tile World and go to my published Tile World Vermal file that I have here. So I'm going to select the Tile World Vermal file. It's going to load that into the inputs. Then it's going to give me a target output for my IVE, Open Drive, and Experiment file. So this will allow us to take the vermal file we just created and convert it to the proper file formats that we need to run in Fusion. So again, you select vermal to IVE, you select generate open drive, generate experiment, you add as an input, you add the tileworld.vermal file or whatever your published vermal file that you just created. Keep in mind that, as you can see here, the output is the same name as the vermal file that I've created. So if you are creating something custom or something like that, and you want to make an experiment out of it, keep that in mind, that that's what it will change it to. So I'm going to hit convert. It's going to start doing its conversion, run through a few different scripts and conversion processes, and then depending on how big your database is, it might take longer, and it'll give me the prompt here that says conversion complete. So once that's complete, I can close database convert. And now if I were to go to my C drive, let's close ISA. If I go to my C drive and into the databases, I can go to exact experiments, and in here I will see my tileworld.exexp, and that is the experiment file that I just generated. In addition, you can see the different generic world day, generic world night, and those are the additional experiment files that we have as examples for you that we used yesterday. So what we're going to do now is we're going to be able to take this and open that into SimCreator DX. So now that we've published it, what we're going to do is we're going to open SimCon like we did yesterday. We're going to start Fusion. Next, we're going to open SimCreator. Then we're going to open our Fusion Desktop Sim. Then after that, we're going to run our Fusion Desktop Sim. While that's running, we're going to open SimCreator DX. We're going to select developer mode. And this time we can go and select File, Open Experiment, and we can open our tileworld.exep. So we want to make sure that the sim is up and running first before we do that, because it's going to try to connect with the sim. So now that I know the sim is up and running, I can go back to SimCreator DX, open my tileworld.exep. It'll load the experiment and connect with the host, and then it'll also switch the database here and place me into my database that I made. So then in here, I have my custom database. And then after lunch, we'll talk about how you can create custom scenarios and talk about what the custom experiment is that we just created and how you can change specific attributes of it. But yes, so right now you can see I can zoom into my own ship and I can drive around in that world that I created, and everything that I'm doing will be updated on SimCreator DX. Is there any questions on this so far? So let's say, you might have missed something or you've made a mistake on Fusion and you want to go back into ISA. You can do that, but keep in mind that you will have to go through that conversion process again. So we definitely recommend that when you are initially developing your world, that you test it in SGL first. I'm using Maxim Civilian, make sure everything's going good before you convert it into an experiment file and move into scenario development. So do as much as you can in ISA first. Make sure you're happy with your road network, with your layout and everything. Keep in mind that if you're first learning about scenario development and stuff like that, we do have worlds that we've already created for you. You don't have to start from scratch if you don't want to. The purpose of teaching you how to do this is if there's something that we might not have provided for you, you can create it on your own. So if you guys have any questions on scenario development or database creation, we can talk about that as well. Just ping me, or if you guys want to mess around with this a little bit more, let me know. But that's pretty much it for the training this morning. And then after lunch, we're going to do the SimCreator DX basics. So if you guys want to mess around with this more, ask me any questions, want to do something specific, just let me know.
I didn't attend the afternoon session last time, so I'm very confused how to exist the